If you've ever wondered about what it's like managing a team of techies, of engineers, the opportunities and challenges that are faced by managers in that kind of industry, then today's episode is worth a listen. We'll also be hearing some lessons learned from building a global online marketplace. And to tell us about those lessons learned from a career spent in various industries, but always with that common theme of technology and software at the heart of it, I'm joined by my guest, Blake Hutchison. He is now the CEO of Flippa.com, which is an online marketplace designed to help business owners and entrepreneurs buy and sell online businesses. So Blake has some insightful, inspirational thoughts on leadership and how to get the best from people in difficult circumstances, but also what he calls peacetime. So he's going to be a great guest. I'm looking forward to having this conversation with him. And listeners, I hope you get something useful from it. This is Leading with Integrity, Leadership Talk, the podcast for first-time managers who are working in tech-driven businesses and teams and who want to be more effective, people-first leaders. Each week, you will learn the crucial strategies, mindsets, and practical tips that successful modern leaders follow to be engaging, ethical, and authentic managers who get the best from their teams. And we'll achieve all of this via weekly conversations with leaders, with leadership experts, entrepreneurs, and business owners, people who have already walked this path and have some amazing insights to share, with an added sprinkling of occasional solo episodes and some group chats where we'll have multiple guests. My name is David Hatch, and I will be your host. And leadership has always been a passion for me. After a career spent in a series of small businesses during 15 years in the aerospace industry, 5 or 6 of those at the end of that career were in a space startup in the UK. So trying to launch satellites into orbit, very cool stuff. And through all of that experience, I learned that the secret to successful management is in the ability to apply great leadership. And in turn, the secret to great leadership, it's all about your integrity, putting people before profits.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast.
Leadership talk for the modern manager.
With your host, David Hatch.
Blake, thank you for joining me on this. Well, in the UK, it's a sunny morning. Where you are down under, I imagine it's probably more sunny.
Believe it or not, we're in dreary Melbourne right now. It's the middle of winter, and Melbourne can have some nice winter days, but today's not one of them. So it's a bit cold, it's a bit dreary, and probably looks a bit more like Britain than I'd like it to.
You might be surprised, but yeah. Well, it's great to meet you. Great to have a conversation today. And as I always do with every episode, I'm going to start by really handing you the reins, handing you the virtual mic to introduce yourself, tell the listeners a bit about your background, what you do, what your business does, and yeah, what gets you out of bed in the morning.
Yeah, thank you, David. I appreciate that. Thanks for having me on the show. Nice to be here. So as you alluded to, I'm Blake Hutchison, and I have the rare privilege of leading Flippa.com, which is a marketplace to buy and sell online businesses. The business has been around for 14 years, but I've been leading it for 5 years. And since that time, we've nearly 5 times our business, which is great. So we're growing. We have a global audience, and we have a global and distributed team, which makes leading fun, but also challenging in some respects. So that's what I do, and day to day, very much orientated to helping the team solve problems for our customers.
I know you as well from reading your biography. You've had a varied career in quite a few different sectors. So I know you worked in like software and tech and finance and even travel, I think, as well at one point.
Definitely had a career in travel. Really enjoyed the travel industry for some time. It's quite mature in an online and tech sense. So it's a good industry to be.
How does travels, I imagine, over the last couple of years?
Rocketed back to stardom. The travel industry is going really well, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it makes sense if everyone's been kind of trapped indoors for a couple of years. That's the first natural thing you want to do, isn't it? Is go somewhere else.
Yeah, that's right. So I used to run a business called Luxury Escapes, and that business essentially went to negative revenue with all of the refunds during COVID. But as you just said, people are well and truly out and about. So leading a travel business at the height of COVID was one of the more challenging things. I admittedly didn't do that because I had already left that business and started to run Flippa by the time COVID came around. But I remember reflecting on how difficult it would be to make leadership decisions during that time. So, yeah, certainly tricky, but nice to see those businesses doing well.
Absolutely. What are some of the similarities that you've seen across all those industries you've worked in and through all the businesses you've worked in and run over the years?
Yeah, so this is the really unique thing because most people orientate their career to one industry and sector. Most people will remain in the education sector. Most people remain in the finance sector. Whatever it is, they tend to spend their time and energy and their working life in one sector. I've been benefited and privileged by working across different business models as well as different categories. And so as an example, I worked at Xero, which is SaaS as a business model, and accounting software as a category. And then, of course, at Luxury Escapes, it's e-com, but it's in the travel industry. So I guess the thing that is most common is that all of these great businesses are built by people. And so there's a people component to every great business, and therefore good leaders are imperative. Decisive decision-making is critical. Speed of execution, regardless of the industry you're in, will tend to pay out in spades. The second thing is that customers expect a lot from you. And so regardless of the industry, regardless of the business, you need to build on behalf of your customers. And so long as you understand what customers want from you, it tends to make decision-making a lot easier. Because when you build for customers, you tend to add enterprise value. And so that's certainly very, very common too.
Yeah, I must say it's one of the biggest lessons I've taken from previous businesses I've worked in. The ones that succeed are the ones who have that customer focus. And the ones who go wrong, don't succeed, fizzle out, fail, whatever word you want to choose, are usually the ones who they've got this really cool idea or this cool piece of technology that they think is really exciting and interesting. And yes, it probably is in most cases, but they don't have that customer connection. They don't. And so they spend too much time quite often struggling to find the customer for what their cool thing is that they've already built.
Totally. So it's either that you don't build for the customers or you do build for the customers, but there's not enough customers. And so it's either a function of market size or it's a function of strategic misalignment. And you've got to figure that out pretty quickly, right? So you've got to get your strategy right. And your strategy tends to be about a customer problem and building a solution for that. But even once you've done that, then you've got to have a product and a price point which makes sense for a large enough number of people to satisfy the type of business you're trying to build.
Yes, that's it, isn't it? Wise words for any budding business owners in the audience. So tell us a bit more about Flippa.com then. Where did that idea originally come from? And what have you done since you've joined to go about building it up?
Yeah, so Flippa spun out of a developer community. That developer community is still a living, breathing online business today. It's called SitePoint.com. So SitePoint's been around for about 20 years. As I mentioned, it was a community. Within the community, there was a forum. And what the founders noticed was that those developers were not only talking about ideas and not only helping each other as well as utilize the resources that SitePoint provided to learn how to code, but they were also trading. And so, smart, savvy people trading source code, trading apps, trading all sorts of things. And as a function of that, they started to offer that as a standalone category within the SitePoint experience. From that, they built out Flippa as a representation for that use case. And then, of course, invited that developer community to come to the Flippa environment and do what they were doing on SitePoint there. So, of course, marketplaces are really hard because you have a cold start problem. You have two sides that you need to solve for. You've got to build liquidity on the buy side and then add supply. That is difficult. And so we were benefited from having a community that was already feeding each other and themselves through the use case. So that was really cool. Since that time, we've done a lot. I mean, strategically, what we've done is we've moved up the value chain. So the average transaction value has increased substantially. And so that was a function of encouraging a different type of customer while, of course, supporting and harnessing the existing community. We said, do you have bigger businesses? Because we have buyers. And on the buy side, once we had those bigger businesses, we told those buyers about it. So it became a matching challenge. And so we've built matching technology so that we can better find you what you want to buy, as much as we can find those sellers who are looking to exit or sell their online businesses the right buyers in the fastest possible time. We've also added a bunch of marketplace integrity through verification. So we do both human verification, which means it's manual. We inspect the financials, both revenue and expense data. But in addition to that, we've built 15 different integrations. And so there's 15 different integrations that enable our business owners to connect to things like Xero, QuickBooks Online, BigCommerce, Shopify, Amazon, Stripe, PayPal, and many, many others. And so what we can do with that is we can pull down the data, we can expose that data to the buying pool, and therefore build trust and credibility around the assets that are actually selling. The other part of that, which is super powerful, is you then get to build insights because you get to see the data on these businesses. And as a function of getting to see the data, you can benchmark assets. And so you can tell buyers what is good about an asset compared to its benchmarks and what is less good about an asset compared to its benchmarks. And these are all new features that we've built that our buyers are getting good benefit from. It helps them make informed decisions, and that's the really important thing. Ultimately, everything we do orientates to happy customers, right? And so our sellers want to sell. So we need to do the things within our power that gives them the best possible chance of selling. And our buyers want to buy. We're very incentivized to have success. When our sellers sell and our buyers buy, they're happy that we're growing as a function of that. So we've done a lot in the last 5 years. We've also expanded territories. So we've opened ourselves up to accept assets from 13 different currencies. That's been really, really important for our global growth. And more recently, we've added sales functions. So we've added teams to help business owners, both buyers and sellers, that is, better use the platform. And we've done that across Austin, Texas, where we built our first sales team. And more recently, we've been doing that in Amsterdam.
Quite a story there. I love the whole concept of spinning it out from an existing platform forum, having that ready to go market, I suppose. I mean, that must have been such an advantage, really, isn't it? And so lucky to have that as well.
Yeah, the community, that's a critical point, David, actually, that you make there, because we are so dependent on our community, and that community has fed itself and each other such that it still is alive and kicking today. There are people who were trading with Flippa 13 and 14 years ago who are doing so as late as yesterday, right? So we are always shocked by how many people say, yeah, I'm back. I now have something I want to sell, but I had a great experience with you 6, 7, 8 years, 10 years ago. And similarly, we'll sometimes see buyers who are browsing. They've been browsing for literally years. The last time they bought something was, in some cases, a decade ago. And all of a sudden, they buy something. So harnessing a community and ensuring that community stays intact and is engaged, even if they're not necessarily a paying customer today, has been really, really important. And so we've done a few things to keep them engaged. We've built deal curation where they can just subscribe to a daily email, which is us curating the best deals so that they can get a feel for what's on the platform. And there's a variety of things that we showcase there. We've built a podcast, much like this one that I'm on with you, David. It's proven to be super helpful for people who are imagining themselves either acquire a business and or exit. It's called The Exit. We've had over 1 million downloads to that podcast, and that's a great way for us to stay in touch with our community. We host meetups all over the world. We did 12 meetups in the last 12 months, and we'll do double that this next 12 months. So those types of things make sure that we stay true to the community and our roots.
Yeah, and it makes sense to me, I'll say. And so the whole global aspect of it, I mean, you're obviously expanding with offices, let's call them, in different countries, but presumably as a global platform, any business or buyer can come from anywhere in the world, right? So with your verification process, do you have to have people in the countries to check the businesses, or can you do most of it remotely, or a bit of both?
Yeah, so the good news is that the data does a lot of the heavy lifting. So we'll pull down the data from the various sources and reconcile that. So, for example, if you connect your QuickBooks Online or your Xero accounting software data, we pull down the profit and loss statement and showcase that. So that's a really, really big help. What we then do is, yes, we have verification individuals that collectively make up the verification team. And we have those in the US, Europe, and also Manila.
Okay, cool. What tips and lessons can you offer to the listeners from leading a global team, particularly a remote team as well?
Yeah, so one of the good things is that obviously we were all forced to be a little more remote during COVID, and Flippa was benefited from always having a globally distributed team. So pre-COVID, we already had people in places like Baltimore, San Francisco, Kingston, Jamaica, Manila, Melbourne, the UK. So for us, it was still difficult. I won't suggest it wasn't, but it was probably less a substantial change compared to what other people had gone through. What I've learned is that it still comes down to good quality recruitment processes. And so you have to have a really clear view as to what the DNA is of your organization. And the best way to do that is to kind of go and look at your contributors, your A players, and try to understand what it is about them that makes them outstanding contributors. And then secondly, ask them what it is about the culture that they like and what it is about working at Flippa that they like. And so you develop some kind of DNA. Once you develop the DNA, then it's important to profile all of your candidates remotely and globally so that they're best possible chance of being a fit. So that's hopefully a good tip. The other tip is, depending on the teams, be careful of how remote you might go, right? So we have engineers here in Melbourne, and we would like to continue to build out a Melbourne function, but we're very cognizant of how good the engineering talent is globally. But what we don't really want to do is go and recruit engineering talent in London, for instance, because if our engineering team is here in Melbourne, for them to go and communicate and do that well, I'm not saying it's not insurmountable. I'm not suggesting it's impossible. But the furthest we have gone so far is Kathmandu in Nepal. So we have 2 individuals working in Nepal, and the time zone is great. You've got 5 hours overlap. So the other tip I would have is, yeah, it's fine to go remote and tap into global talent, absolutely. But think about how far you can stretch your teams, because the minute you go outside the business day and the likelihood of them sharing information and communicating openly, then the more likely you have a chance of communications being missed or strategies being less well understood.
Yeah, that's a really important point, isn't it? Because, I mean, on the face of it, it feels like you're maximizing your efficiency if you can have like the opposite time zones, because then any given hour in a 24-hour period, someone's going to be at work. But actually, you're totally right. If there's no overlap, that communication just, I mean, there's only so much you can do via emails from 5 hours ago. Or
You can have someone who's just outstanding. They leave their desk at the end of the day and write a Bible about what they did that day and where the overlap is and where they would like the person to take over. But that's wishful thinking. The average person finishes their workday and they want to walk out. And so as a function of that, you have to have overlap. And that's something we've learned the hard way.
Yeah, that's a really good lesson. And even if you did have that person who's writing that Bible, it's not really the best use of their time, is it? Because spending all the time documenting all that stuff when it could have been a 5-minute conversation instead.
Yeah, totally. We're actually benefited because the vast majority of our customer base, revenue-generating customer base, is in the US, or I would say North America and Europe. And so we deploy here on the Australian Business Day. And the good news about that is that our core customer base is asleep. And so, at least for the most part. And so as a function of that, we can deploy knowing full well that, it gives us the opportunity to test in a production environment without huge risk.
Yeah, you're getting a head start, aren't you? If something goes wrong, you've got more time.
The thing I would say about the benefits of having a globally distributed team is if you do, in fact, service customers globally, you can utilize that team to go and speak to your customers, get a feedback loop going.
Yeah, absolutely. That face-to-face thing. Even post-COVID, I think it's still very important to the majority of people.
Yeah, well, we've been hosting meetups all over the world, and we've got a SDR, sales development representative, and he calls on a lot of our Southeast Asian leads. And we just hadn't thought about it, but he reached out and said, Pakistan's not a bad market. Why I'm based here? Why don't I do a meetup in Islamabad? And we have a decent following in Pakistan, but we didn't think of a meetup there. But by nature of having that globally distributed workforce, you get to tap into a new customer base in a way that you might otherwise have found it difficult to do so. So he went and hosted that. There were 70 attendees, and we built some revenue off the back of that small meetup, and that's a good little win.
Yeah, and that's interesting as well, because while for you guys that was, I guess it was already standard operating procedure, wasn't it? For a lot of businesses in the world, COVID has made that more possible for them, because when suddenly you're remote, you don't have a choice anymore. But actually, the advantage of that is it opens up all these new horizons. And it's certainly been the case for me. I mean, I'm doing this podcast as well. I speak to people I never would have met 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's because of that shift in mindset, in mentality, if you like, about the nature of work and about what markets we can access, who we can talk to. I think that's the really exciting thing that's come out of the last few years, but makes it worth it.
Completely.
Okay, so last question then, and I think you probably already answered this, but maybe if you can distill it down to the one key thing, if you can. What is the key thing to building a successful international and online marketplace such as Flippa? Yeah,
so I would distill it down to ascertaining and understanding the key problem that your customers have today. And so for us, the key problem that we are trying to solve is a seller wants to sell to the right buyer in the quickest possible time. If you can understand that, then the deliverables that make that a possibility for those business owners to successfully sell to the right buyer in the fastest possible time become more obvious to you. And so what we try to do is we work in 8-week sprint cycles, every department. I'm not talking about engineering and product. I'm talking about sales, marketing, customer support, finance, and everyone is told to distill their issues down into the smallest set of problems with the biggest possible outcome. And so I would say that the biggest learning for me is to challenge the problem orientation and to find the few problems that solve for the biggest number of issues and where you can imagine the results of the solution centricity giving you the biggest bang for buck.
Really important lesson. Totally agree there. Yeah. Not that I've ever built an online marketplace. I think it's quite an important point for any business, really, is that understanding the problem first.
Yeah. And so like access, right? So sellers want to access buyers and buyers want to access sellers. And so that means at any given time, we have to make sure that we can pull in enough supply to satisfy what buyers want. Otherwise, they'll go elsewhere. Mm-hmm. And at any given time, we can pull in enough buyers to satisfy what sellers want. And so we spend a lot of time thinking about access.
Yeah. And I mean, as you said earlier, you've got twice the problem of most businesses because you've got to have both sides of the transaction for your business to work. So, yeah, I can only imagine the amount of effort and work involved in doing that.
That's a really good point. You have to decide which side of your marketplace is most resilient because you don't have the time to work on both sides at any given time or the resources necessarily. And so buyers have money. Buyers are used to searching out for assets. They're quite resilient, whereas a seller wants to sell. They really want to sell. So you got to solve for them really quickly. So we've started to flip that a little bit, but for the moment, or at least for the last year, it's been seller centric in the way we think about sales, marketing, and product undertaking.
Yeah, and good use of the company name there in a sentence as well. Well done.
Right.
Okay, let's talk about leadership then. So my first question on that one is, what has been your own best experience of being led during your career?
Yeah, so the best experience I've probably had is really a function of my experience at Xero, which again is a SaaS business cloud accounting software, where, you know, the leader was clear in what he expected. He was driven, and so you got a clear sense of the North Star metric. And he was, for the most part, a very balanced personality. And so whether times were tough, whether it was wartime or peacetime, you essentially knew what you were going to get. And so that's been a critical learning for me, right? Because businesses are tough. They are roller coaster rides. Marketplaces are even tougher because you don't get to control the pricing. And so revenue can be up despite the fact you sell more units, or revenue can be down despite the fact you sell more units, or revenue can be up and you've sold 50% of the units. Like it's kind of crazy in a marketplace context because you don't get to control pricing like so many others. And so the biggest learning I've had, and still learning how to do this best, is just to have a balanced viewpoint through peaks and troughs. And so I learned a lot from that.
Yeah, that's a very interesting dynamic, actually. I was talking to someone about this yesterday as well. And one of the big bits of feedback you get from quite a lot of followers is the worst leaders are the ones who are inconsistent, who they have this sort of mercurial nature and they flip from one to the other and back again. And so, yeah, I mean, it's consistency, isn't it? But then what I also find really interesting is the balance, as you said, between the need for authenticity and also being able to show how you're feeling about stuff. Yeah. And walking that line between, yeah, okay, I'm disappointed in this, or yeah, I'm really excited about this, but without dramatically swinging back and forth all the time is quite a trick.
and so that comes down to a commitment to yourself and to others. So the commitment I make to myself and to others is that I'll be decisive in my decision making, knowing that there's very few decisions that are that serious that I can't actually walk back from. And so my commitment to everyone is, if you come to me with a problem, I believe we can solve it quickly, and I believe we can come up with an approach quickly and decisively in such a way that we will figure out whether we have the same problem next week or not. And so that's my commitment. My commitment to everyone is I'm very decisive. You will get a decision very, very quickly. It could be no, but at least you'll get it quickly. And so if people know that, then they feel comfortable coming to you because they know they're going to get an outcome.
Yeah, and I think my favorite thing about what you said there was There's very rarely something that's going to be so big you can't walk it back. And I think the reason that I like that is because information changes, we learn new things, and it's quite important, I think, to be able to reassess things. No decision is ever fixed in stone, apart from Brexit. Sorry, I couldn't resist politics there.
Flipped it in.
Yeah. But it is important, though, because I think a big mistake that a lot of managers in particular make, not just leaders more generally, is I've made that decision, it's done, I'm not thinking about it anymore. Whereas, as you say, next week something else might happen, or we might learn something new about the same problem that changes our opinion, and we need to revise that decision. And I think that's just as important as making the decision in the first place.
Yeah. Well, so speed as a habit relies on decisive decision making. And so if you believe that your company is better off when it acts quickly, servicing the interests of customers, even if you get it wrong from time to time, then you have no choice but to be decisive in your decision making, because if you don't decide something, it's impossible to execute at speed.
Yeah, absolutely. And you end up getting into that sort of limbo state, don't you? The indecisiveness and the waiting for the perfect decision that will never be made.
Yeah, and we're okay. What we encourage, so we say to our staff, you need to understand that this is a high change environment. So if you're not someone who's adaptable to change, this isn't a great environment for you, because our job is to get better every day. And to get better every day, we need to change the way we behave. We need to change the feature set. We need to improve the feature set. We need to adapt so that our customers know that they can expect us to improve.
Yeah, and I think we're straying into the next question, really, but I'll ask it anyway. What do you think is the biggest mistake that a leader or manager can make?
Yeah, so I will say that procrastination within a leader isn't a good trait, in my opinion. I will also say that staff expect people to be transparent, and so there is such a thing, in my opinion, as too much transparency, because I think in some cases, business realities can raise fears for people. But generally speaking, I would say the biggest mistake is not being transparent enough about where the business is at and what you expect people to achieve. And then probably the other thing is not actually staying true to a strategy and accepting the consequences of good and bad decision making. And so the number of times I've said, oh, wow, we got that wrong, didn't we? And we should be totally okay as leaders with getting it wrong very often, so long as when we get it right, it really pays off.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, especially about transparency. I mean, they're kind of connected, those things, I think, because, a lot of leaders, particularly senior leaders, there's a temptation, isn't there, when things go wrong, to not admit it or to try and spin it into a success. And I think that lacks transparency. It lacks honesty to a point.
It's about the information you have at your disposal. So you can make a decision last week. But once you get transparency, and you can see the data and you understand how customers responded to something, you reserve the right to change that decision. So long as you're not asking people to context switch at a rate that impacts their productivity, then it should be A-OK.
I also agree with you about that. There is such a thing as too much transparency. I think, for me, that's always been kind of situational. It depends on the context. It depends on the nature of the information as well. I mean, there's always going to be some level that you have to keep private because, it might be about employee data or some confidential thing for a client and so on. But then you've got to find that line, haven't you? What's the most that you can share without causing damage? And that should be your minimum amount to share as well as your maximum, if you like.
I'll give you a good example. A good example would be that the average runway that a company has post raising venture capital is 2 years. The average, so it doesn't matter whether I raise 5 million or 50 million, the average is 2 years, because I then am given the right to spend that money to grow. Okay. But I say, welcome, David. Welcome to your first day at Flippa. we have 2 years before we're out of money. Okay. The average person can't get their head around the fact that when you raise venture capital, you are setting yourself up for a 2-year runway. Now, that implies we either find a pathway to profitability at approximately the 2-year mark, or that you're setting your growth trajectory up to be able to raise additional capital, in which case you'll extend your runway by 2 years. But that's a scary concept to a new staff member in many cases, because the idea that I give you job security for 2 years, that's daunting for some people.
Yeah, it is. I think that's part and parcel of working in that kind of company, though, isn't it? I think you have to take that risk on by agreeing to work there, in my opinion, anyway. I think the counter to that is when the runway's getting quite slim, if you don't tell them at that point. I mean, for me, that's a responsibility because there's a risk to them, to their livelihood. You've got to tell them.
Right.
Yeah. And I've worked in both companies that have done both extremes there, and I'm not sure which is worse.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Look, if you've got 6-month runway and you take on a new staff member, you're playing with their livelihood, and that's not a good thing.
Mm. What's the best thing about what you do?
Well, the best thing about what I do is, I guess, 2 things. One, we do work on a lot of stuff that is problem-centric, and it tends to work really well. And so I said this today at our all hands. I absolutely love the speed at which we execute, because it tends to be that when we deliver something, be it sales, marketing, or product related, our customers give us instant feedback and we learn. And so I love seeing our team execute because I love seeing the data come in at the customer response. I get a real kick out of that. The second thing I love most is that we are dealing with global entrepreneurs looking to exit their companies. And so we do actually make dreams come true. When I sell your business for $100,000, I just put $100,000 in your back pocket as a function of having our marketplace. And that is meaningful. And it sets about a new pathway for our business owners. And I love the emotional connection they have to the success. Sometimes it's tears. Sometimes it's champagne. Sometimes it's, oh, I wish I could have sold it for more than that. It's a bit disappointing, but it's good to have got it sold anyway. Regardless of which way it is, that there's a huge amount of emotion caught up in the exit experience. Similarly for buyers, you can have a buyer out of Italy buy something out of Florida. And then they're pumped about that next journey that they're on. I just acquired an e-commerce business. Not me, I'm giving an example. And now I'm the proud owner of this great e-commerce company generating $10,000 a month in profit. Isn't this going to be a wonderful journey? They're on to something new. And so I love that.
Yeah, it's making dreams come true, isn't it? As you said, I can see how that would be exciting.
It's great. It's great. It's less good when someone expects to sell and they don't sell. But on the flip side, you ask for the positive, and you know, we see around 50% of all of the assets that list on our platform sell. So that means we're making a lot of good stories.
Yeah. So what would be your best piece of advice then to any new or aspiring leader who may be listening? Yeah,
I mean, the best bit of advice I've still got today, which has frankly taken me a long time to realize, is just how important it is to find the right talent, not go so quick at that part of the job that you end up with the wrong talent. And then once you have the right talent, should they have an expertise that you don't have a skill set around, give them the reins to be a very powerful influence within the organization. And watching people thrive when they're given that empowerment, particularly if they come to the table with that skill set. Sometimes you need to be more hands-on because you're taking on more junior talent and they need the assistance. So the best possible talent with a skill set that you don't have that can solve for a weakness in the organization gives you a huge amount of leverage.
There's that well-known quote, isn't there, by Steve Jobs? Is it a Jobs-ism? I don't know. Anyway, about you hire people who know more about that something and then you let them tell you what to do, not the other way around. And I think that's such an important, especially when you're in a tech-driven kind of environment such as you are. Which leads me to another question, actually. What is it you think it makes it unique or uniquely challenging managing engineering and tech type people?
I stop and pause because we do have a damn good product and engineering function. But I think probably what makes it uniquely challenging for me is I understand the customer problem very, very well and the way I'd like the product or the feature set to satisfy the problem. But I don't understand the technology under the hood. So therefore I can't provide, and I have to be incredibly trusting of how the solution is built, how long it should or shouldn't take to build the solution. And so perhaps the most frustrating thing is not their fault, it's my fault. It's my lack of knowledge around how they do what they do at the level they do it at. You've just got to respect the talent and then find pathways to help them be more efficient over time. And that's either the tooling or the expectations you put in front of them. And so, yeah, I would say that that's probably my single biggest frustration. But at the end of the day, it's overcome by allowing people to build what they think is the right pathway and then using data to measure it. What is your load time? How does that compare to peer benchmarks? How many listings are you launching this month? If you put in place that change, did you launch more the next month? Like, data is quite powerful in understanding whether someone's done the right thing or not.
True. And as you said earlier, the speed at which you're able to deliver, I mean, that obviously means you're getting it right somewhere.
Yeah. And we have so much data sitting here at Flippa, it's sometimes a bit crippling. But the good news is that, for example, we needed to measure buy-side intent. And we needed a step between inquiring and going to an APA, asset purchase agreement, that gave us clear understanding of where someone was at in their purchasing pathway. And so we built a letter of intent builder and they could submit an LOI on the platform. And that worked reasonably well, but then people had to find it. So then we said to the team, nudge them. I literally said to the engineering team, tell all the buyers at certain stages of their discussion, their negotiation, that, hey, we have this LOI builder. Well, we literally went from, it was like Q1, 21 LOIs submitted. And then last quarter was 196 LOIs. So in the space of 3 quarters, we literally 10 times, from like 21 to 196. It was like literally 10 times the number of LOIs. And so the data proved that not only did we make the right call, but the data proved that the team was able to deliver at a speed which gave us the growth.
Absolutely. And if I was playing leadership bingo as well, I think I would have just won, because we've had trust, respect, given the tools, given the environment, empowerment, all of these nice things. I think you've ticked all the boxes. So
trying my best.
Well, I think there's some really, really powerful and useful lessons in there, though, for any aspiring leader who may be listening.
Leadership Heroes.
Okay, well, I'm nearly out of questions. I've got my last question now, and it's always my favourite one, and it is deliberately difficult. It's called Leadership Heroes. So this question is, if you had to pick any person you like, one person, they can be alive or dead, past, present, figure from history, real or fictitious as well, if you get really stumped, who, in your opinion, would perfectly embody leadership, who would that person be and why?
Yeah, so I found this difficult because there's not that many great leaders, and so you dig and you dig and you dig and you try to find someone who was able to thrive during a challenging period. And so I went with Abe Lincoln because he was clearly a very revered leader during one of the most challenging times in the United States, obviously being the Civil War. And so, clear vision, that's helpful for people. Effective communicator, even more helpful for people. They need to not only understand the vision, but have it communicated to them. And then crazy good resilience, right? Huge amounts of numerous challenges, lots of setbacks. And so I've always found it interesting that the business books that orientate to leadership talk about the perfect leader. The perfect leader is a peacetime leader. Peacetime leadership is very easy. Wartime leadership is the hardest leadership. And very few people write about wartime leaders. And so I don't mean wartime literally, but Abe was. And so if you can take some of those learnings and apply it to the challenging market we're living in right now, where the macroeconomics are working against what most businesses are trying to achieve, it's probably the best example we've got right now of differentiating what was peacetime leadership, which was essentially for tech, the COVID bubble, and what is now wartime leadership, where interest rates are high, inflationary pressure is high. The macroeconomic climate suggests that the capital markets aren't going to be as flush with cash and as giving with their cash. And so it's wartime leadership right now.
It is a deliberately difficult question, and it is slightly unfair by putting the word perfect in there. And I have to admit, I don't actually believe in such a thing as a perfect absolute standard of leadership. Yeah. For a lot of the reasons you've just described. And I actually think the perfect leader is the perfect leader in that situation, in that context. And so that's why it's always quite interesting to hear some of the examples that I get from guests. And I do like Abe Lincoln as an example. I think that's really good. And the other thing you haven't mentioned as well, of course, is the whole anti-slavery piece and doing the right moral, ethical thing as well, which particularly in those circumstances and with the challenges he faced at the time, the way the States was, I mean, that's just so admirable, but also such a great example of leadership. It's leading from the front, isn't it?
Yeah, and such an unpopular opinion among half the country, right? So, like when you're dealing with unpopular opinions, it's tough to be the perfect leader. So, all you can do is stand by your morals and as they say, lead from the front.
Yeah, and it's a really great example as well of the power of authenticity and being driven by the values that you hold. And because it would have been so easy for him to kind of seek a compromise and then you go halfway or whatever, but he didn't. And yes, threatened the existence of his whole country.
Went all the way, right?
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, really great example. I love that. We've only got one thing really left to ask, which I do at the end of every episode, which is if the listeners would like to learn more about you, what you do, reach out, have a chat. Do you want to point them towards a website or LinkedIn profile or all of the above?
Yeah. Certainly, if you're interested in, a little pitch here, if you're interested in buying and selling a business, certainly come to flippa.com. Thanks so much, David. And you can follow along with some of the features we build and why we build them and the decisions we've made around that, which will give you a sense of how we work at Flippa as well as my leadership style. My LinkedIn's probably the best bet, so just go and find me at Blake Hutchison.
Awesome. And I'll put the links in the episode description so everyone can find it easily. And that's it from me. Blake, thank you so much for your time today. It's been really great chatting with you. And I've certainly learned a lot about online marketplaces. I'm sure the listeners have as well.
Thank you, David.
Blake, thank you again for your time today. Really good conversation. Loved that one. Listeners, if you would like to learn more about Blake, about Flippa, about what they get up to, how it works, and have a look at their platform even, I've put the website address in the episode description, as well as a link to Blake's LinkedIn profile. So I'm sure he'd love to hear from you. Reach out and have a chat. Are you a new manager? Are you working in a tech-driven team or a techie business, struggling with software or engineering, how to get the best out of the experts that you work with or for? If confidence is a challenge, if you're feeling that imposter syndrome as you're taking that first step up the leadership ladder, if you're struggling to get the best out of people, if you're facing problems with staff engagement or just general disinterest or lack of productivity, if the job isn't getting done as well as you would like it to be, then leadership can be the answer to your problem. Leading with Integrity is here to help. I have a range of programs, but I highly recommend the first step is join our Integrity Leaders online community. Head over to the website. It's www.leadernotaboss.com. Again, I'll put that link in the episode description. When you get to that website, you will find a short video that will tell you a bit about the community, how it works, the group program that's built around it, and some of the benefits and features of that. But if that doesn't give you enough information to make a decision, there is also a link underneath the video to book a conversation directly with me. It will give you access directly to my calendar. We can have a quick chat about leadership, find out what your challenges are, what information you need to know from me, and then see about how we can help and how we might be able to work together. So do head over to the website, www.leadernotaboss.com, and I hope to hear from you very soon. That's all for this episode. I hope you'll be able to join me again next week when I'll be talking to Alan G. Crone, employment law expert from the US. So we'll be talking about all kinds of things leadership and employment law related. So if you ever wondered about some of the legal challenges and loopholes, and well, maybe not loopholes, but anyway, and things that you need to bear in mind as a manager operating in the US market, that is definitely an episode you won't want to miss. So I hope you'll be able to join us next week and hear all the insights that Alan has to share as well. In the meantime, thank you for listening today. Have a great rest of your week and be a leader, not a boss.